Farhan Lalji joining us from out in the West Coast. Farhan, it could mean so much. It could mean absolutely nothing. It's one of those old scoreboard watching games, which we don't get that often in the CFL.
Yeah, and we've kind of known in the last few weeks where most of the playoff spots were going to land. So, while there's no playoff spots, certainly home field, it's a big deal. And if you're Saskatchewan and if you're Corey Mace, like what a statement you'd be making by hosting the Western Final in your first year as a head coach. So, could mean a ton, and I think that Saskatchewan needs this, right? Like it feels like the fan base, tell me if I'm wrong, right? Other than the Winnipeg game, the game after Labor Day, it just feels like there hasn't been a complete level of buy-in yet, especially when you look at the crowds that Saskatchewan has drawn this year. And look, we always grade the Riders on a curve. They draw well, but they don't necessarily fill it other than that one game. A Western Division final would be full, and it'd be such a great thing for the franchise.
Yeah, no, you are correct. I think a final or a semifinal will be packed. It's a little fickle. It's a little fickle in Saskatchewan nowadays. Again, harvest always has a lot to do with that. But no, I would agree with you as well, Farhan. Hey, what? So
I wouldn't be offending the entire fan base if I said that Winnipeg has passed Saskatchewan as the premier fan base in the league now. Is that offensive?
Self-awareness.
Do people accept that?
We got to have self-awareness. Right. We have to be able to look in that mirror and say, yeah, although it's weird and their city's weird and all their streets run weird ways, Winnipeg has surpassed. So there we go. Who's going to be the starting quarterback?
But I'd much rather spend time in Regina.
Yeah,
I'd much rather spend time in Regina than Winnipeg. Just for the record.
Way to sandwich that. Yeah, way to sandwich that. You'll be a good boss someday.
There you go.
Who's starting on the November 2nd for the BC Lions?
Vernon Adams, without question, right? I mean, when you saw what he did in the Montreal game, but more importantly, how the team responded to him, right? And that's what this was about. Rick Campbell had run out of levers to play with this team. It became abundantly clear that this is what the team wanted. This is what the offense wanted. Not a slight to Nathan Rourke, but just a feeling that Vernon Adams had been mistreated in all of this, right? And so people talk about a divided room. It wasn't divided. It was just, this is kind of where they were. And again, like talking to these guys, even off camera, they like Nathan and they know he can play and they don't think this all falls on him. But there is a feeling that that Vernon got treated poorly. And even Vernon kind of admitted that he expected to be treated the way Nathan Rourke was treated in 2022 when Nathan came back off injury. I mean, it was immediately handed back to him. And Vernon thought, if it's not going to be immediately handed back, at least give me an opportunity to compete for it. Neither of those things happened. So a lot of people had a spring in their step. And is it enough for this team to go on another 3-game run here? We'll see, but they look pretty good against Montreal.
Speaking of Montreal and Winnipeg, that game on Saturday, the first game on Saturday, a lot of people are asking, what will Montreal do? How will they decide, who's going to play, how much they're going to play with them having a bye after that all the way to the Eastern Final? Your thoughts on what you think Montreal will do or maybe should do?
Well, I think they're going to play everybody. I really do. I think that everybody that's healthy is going to play. Now, if there was that player that if it was a playoff game, we'd play him, that player probably doesn't play, right? But I do know that Cody Fajardo is starting that game. And, will he be on a pitch count? I doubt it, right? But, look, I don't want to say this. I want to say this respectfully. I think Montreal also knows they got a really, really good quarterback behind Cody Fajardo in Davis Alexander. So they can take a risk that nobody else can take, that most other teams couldn't take, right? Winnipeg can't take that risk. Saskatchewan can't take that risk. The drop-off between Cody Fajardo and Davis Alexander is less than it is in any of the other teams that are playing in the playoffs, so they could potentially take it. But I don't think that Jason Moss is happy with how the last game went, and I think there is some truth to going into the playoffs with the level of momentum, and losing 27-3 doesn't afford you that momentum.
I'll always remember, when was it, July? When we had Farhan on, and he says, probably a good chance you're going to see Davis Alexander in that game. And everyone was like, whatever. And then, boom, we saw him in there. And everyone's like, well, Farhan. Yeah, the guy's a veteran. He knows what he's talking about, right? CFL aside here, let's go to the NFL a little bit.
Yeah.
Hopkins to the Chiefs. Sounds like it's done.
I love it.
Do you?
I love it. It's done. Oh, yeah. I do. Look, and I will always be grateful to Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes for taking us away from Bill Belichick. So when it comes to Super Bowl storylines, so I understand there's a lot of people out there that have Chiefs fatigue. I'm not one of them because Andy Reid is a great person to deal with. I love dealing with Andy Reid. So, he's entertaining, doesn't take himself seriously. He can be self-deprecating, and his offense is incredibly entertaining to watch, and not just because Mahomes is the quarterback, but just in terms of play design and what they do. They have fun with the game. So I don't get tired of that. So the fact that they can add Hopkins, and they've done this before, whether they've got a small bump from a Kadarius Toney or whoever it may be, they're not afraid to make that decision. When you look at this deal and you saw a second-round pick is what everybody else was going for, well, they managed to get a fifth-round pick that could escalate to a fourth if they knock it out of the park with this trade, and they're going to be paying half the salary with the Titans, right? So, and it's only a one-year deal, so there's no wrong here, right? To be able to be a complimentary piece when you lose Rashee Rice, you got to go here if you can.
It's a heck of a deal. Although I do have Chiefs fatigue, I do applaud what they did. What does he have left? Like Hopkins?
Well, it's a great question. I don't know, and I say that because look, he's only 32. His numbers this year are kind of average, but when you look at what that team is offensively across the board, it's average, right? I mean, they've kind of gone back and forth a little bit at quarterback. I like Will Levis. I think he's going to be a good player in this league. But, I do know that there's inconsistency there. And so they've kind of had to make some short-term decisions to kind of get through. But he hasn't been necessarily put in a position to have a lot of success. Whereas I think you go to Kansas City and you play in that offense, I think they're going to get the best out of him, right? And, will they get Hollywood Brown back at some point? I don't know. They'll probably get Juju Smith-Schuster back in the next couple of weeks, right? So, that offense has still got some room to grow. Pacheco will come back sooner than later. So they're still going to ascend, and I think Hopkins is going to be a big part of that.
Farhan, our viewers, of course, can't, or our listeners, rather, can't see that you're in your car right now, but you said you're on your way back from Canucks practice, a hard-working man. What can you give us the latest from the Canucks?
Well, some interesting moments in Canuck practice because late in the practice, at the end of a drill, JT Miller and Elias Pettersson got into a bit of a stick exchange, and Miller had some words for Pettersson. Now, look, you can chalk that up to practice and battle and, whatever it may be, coming back off a long road trip. But that was interesting, right? That was a little different. But with Pettersson, who's had assists in his last two games, guys had a 5-on-5 goal for this team in 37 games. You got to go back to March 5th,
Jeez.
2 days after he signed his big contract, for the last time he's done that. And it's been 30 games since he's had a multi-point game. So I was the only person that was there that stuck around for Pettersson today and had a chance to talk to him. And he's like, yeah, you could click on my numbers and think that I stink. And so you could tell that he's still wearing this a little bit. He needs to score. He needs to get on a bit of a run. But the fact that this team has scored 20 goals and is 3-1-2 in 6 games, and he's had none of those goals, and Jake DeBrusk has had none of those goals, this team still has a level to reach offensively. They still can ascend a little bit. So he's looked good in the last 2 games. And I asked Rick Tocchet about it, and Tocchet talked about, look, this guy's got to move his feet more, and he's playing on a line with Connor Garland and Nils Höglander, and Garland is like the Energizer Bunny, right? Both of these other guys are. So Tocchet wanted to make it clear that it's Connor Garland driving this line and not Pettersson. So that was the interesting takeaway for me. But look, they feel good winning these last 3 games after the sky was falling 3 games ago.
I watched him quite a few times when he was with Arizona, Garland, and talk about a fly under the radar, doesn't get the respect guy. I think that is soon going to change. He's got 6 points. He's got 3-3 in 6 games. Kind of stirring that drink there in Vancouver, right, for a 5th rounder.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you get, you look at Connor Garland a year ago at the start of the year, he'd been given permission, his agent had been given permission to seek a trade. He was widely viewed as an inefficient contract. Well, that changed in a hurry last year. And then he wound up playing with Dakota Joshua and Teddy Bluger for what was at one point the best third line in the league. right? And people thought that he probably should have been, played as a top 6. Well, Joshua's going to come back in about a week or so. So we'll see how they reconfigure their lineup at that point. But Connor Garland, in the last season and change here, has completely flipped the script on his value to this organization.
Are you surprised with what we're seeing? And I know it's early in the season, and I'm never going to bet against him again. I'm not going to bet on him either. What's going on in Edmonton?
I'm not surprised. You would have thought they would have learned last year, but at the same time, going through what you did in the first, 2 months of the season last year and still winding up in Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final really puts you in a position where you don't have that kind of urgency, right? And, I'll never forget in 2011, I've used this story before, but Henrik Sedin, before Game 7, said to a reporter, hey, when we're playing, essentially, when we're playing Columbus in January next year, don't call it a big game, right? And so, these guys know when they get to that end, of the rainbow and they come that close that it's just so hard to create that level of intensity. So they're going back and forth, Draisaitl and McDavid playing on a line or not. What are we going to do with Darnell Nurse, who was a disaster for so much of last season? But, in the end, he was a top 4 defenseman on a Stanley Cup finalist team. Where are they at with Skinner in goal? All those questions are going to come up, but they're going to come up with a smaller level of urgency because everybody kind of chuckles knowing what they've been through last year and knowing that there's plenty of time for this team to recover because they're just that good.
Keeping it in Alberta, talk about the Calgary Flames, Farhan. Everybody thought this was going to be a year that was going to be, oh, man, it's going to be a tough one. But here they are, undefeated. Shout out to Jason LaBarbera, friend of the show, friend of SportsCage, working with the goaltenders out there. Just your thoughts on what Calgary has done. Once again, pumping the brakes. It's early.
It's good. It's fun, right? And, they goaltending change, and they're playing with 2 now that, and Markstrom's gone, and this is a team that set its roster up, not necessarily to fail, but, we knew there was going to be a level of youth there, but they still didn't want to go necessarily full tear-down rebuild, right? Because you've still got Huberdeau's contract. You've still got players like Nazem Kadri and others. So I like what they're doing. It's great, right? They're getting buy-in from Huska. Huska is getting buy-in, and it's good. And teams need to go through this, right? Vancouver went through it a couple of years earlier where they had a bit of a run early on in the season, right? And they wound up playing where they could kind of raise the expectation, even if it was a short period of time. So I still don't think this roster is deep enough to get into the playoffs, but for them to just be able to have some more, I don't want to say meaningful games, we're still in October, but for them to still be in it now and to still, you go on these kinds of starts, right? And you come out of the gate like this, it buys you time until November, December, right? And it at least keeps the games fun.
We have some people that when you're on, they love that we talk college football. What are you making of things right now? Every week, it's just an absolute head scratcher. I love it. We've never had this in college football before.
Yeah, and the playoff does this, right? Because and I'm not a playoff guy because it, diminishes big games in the regular season, in my opinion, right? Ohio State lost nothing by losing to Oregon. The first Georgia-Alabama game really didn't have a lot of stakes. Everybody was into it, but didn't have a lot of stakes. Now, all of a sudden, Bama's lost again. I know, right? Bama has lost again, and they can't lose again. They cannot lose again, right? Otherwise, will the SEC get a 3-loss team going in? Potentially, but the margins are getting finer, right? So it's been a wild season, and a lot of games have managed to be relevant, even if the stakes aren't what they were. If you were going to put a wager on, let's say you're me, right now with how it's falling, who do you go with? Because I don't know. I don't know who I'm really confident in. Georgia's going to win the national title. I think they're the best team, and if I had money to bet, I'd bet it on them. Despite their loss, I still like Ohio State. A lot of improbable bounces late in that game went Oregon's way, and it was in Autzen. You play that game on a neutral site, I'm still picking Ohio State. Their high-end talent is better. I think they're better defensively, and I think the second time around I pick Ohio State. But for me, Georgia's my top team. And then I want to circle back. This is really hacky, but I didn't get a chance to ask it. Go back to the NFL. With Hopkins now going to the Chiefs, what does this mean for Cooper Kupp? What do you think? Yeah, and that was kind of at the top of my wish list for where he was going to land. Yeah, I mean, look, there's still teams that are looking and they're playing themselves out. Like I mean, I'm trying to think of who's left for him to go to, and his contractual situation's a little bit different. So, I'm not sure that those obvious teams are where he's going to land. Like, I mean, people were mentioning Dallas at one point, right? Well, look at where they're at standings wise. Do you make that investment in bringing a guy like that in at this stage? Anything to kind of shake up the room? Like, there's a huge need in Dallas to have another weapon outside of CeeDee Lamb, is there not?
Yes. I hope he
They
goes
need a
there.
lot of. They need a lot of weapons.
They need so much there, and I don't know that you do that at this stage, but he would certainly be an upgrade to that offense. I mean, I don't know. Buffalo was able to get theirs done, and the top teams have been able to get their guys taken care of. So I'm not sure who's going to make that plunge right now, right?
Yeah. How many sample sizes?
What do you think?
I don't know. The contract is, like you said, the thing that I don't think it makes it as easy. How many sample sizes do you need to see if Russ is really going to cook in Pittsburgh?
Well, and that's the other team, right, that has a real receiver need. If you ask me to go alongside of Pickens, I think Justin Fields will be starting for this team before the end of the year. Yeah. I do. I just think he's better. Russ is very feast or famine. The best part that Russ has going for him, in my opinion, is just how good that defense is. And that defense will allow every game to stay close and not, they don't have to rely on Russell to put up a big number game after game. So that'll allow him to kind of stay in it. But I still think by the end of this all, whether it's injury or performance, Justin Fields is going to be the quarterback at the end of the year for Pittsburgh.
All right. What's up with your football? You guys into playoffs? The team you're coaching?
Oh, I just coach a little middle school team. I just help out with an 8th grade team, and we've got one game left, and then my son's team has got a couple games left before they get into playoffs. They're ranked, I think, 2nd or 3rd in the state in their classification. So big games are coming. It'll be fun. And BC High School gets going, and we've got 2 more league games to go in BC High School before we begin playoffs. We can play longer here, right? We're going into December. We got to work around a Taylor Swift concert here in British Columbia. The championships are, I think, December 2nd, and we got to get out immediately because Taylor Swift's crew's coming in the next day.
My wife and daughter are going to that concert. I'm starting to hear it daily.
Yeah,
daily.
Love it. I get the calls from my 12-year-old daughter too because she definitely wants to get there.
Right on, Farhan. Let's catch up next week.
All right, see you guys.